June 22, 1944. Above Arezzo, Italy. The sun hung low over Tuscany, bleeding gold across a canvas of smoke. In the cockpit of a B-26 Marauder, Second Lieutenant Thomas Blake squinted through his goggles. Sweat blurred the bomb scope. Radio chatter echoed. All units, abort. Repeat, abort. Return to base. Below, nestled between cypress groves, something shimmered. Too smooth, too organized. He saw it. Camouflage nets billowing over fuel drums. Trucks, figures scrambling. A depot the map said didn't exist. Blake hovered his hand over the release switch. Orders said no, but every instinct screamed yes. He had 10 seconds to decide, and a whole war behind that choice. He hadn't dropped yet, but everything was already falling. 4 days earlier, June 18, 1944, Foggia Airfield, southern Italy. The hangar buzzed like a hornet's nest. Tools clanged, oil sizzled in the sun. Mechanics shouted over engines, and somewhere a radio played Glenn Miller, barely loud enough to matter. Inside briefing room 3C, it was all discipline. White boards, chalk dust, maps riddled with red arcs. "Your job is simple," said Major Franklin Pierce, squinting through wire-rimmed glasses. "Fly north. Confirm visual. Release if ordered. Otherwise, return." The room nodded. No one spoke. Lieutenant Tom Blake sat second row, eyes fixed forward. His hands folded on his lap, still streaked with grease from morning inspection. At 23, he looked older. That's what a year of war did. The mission was part of Operation Strangle, a precision bombing campaign meant to choke German supply lines from the air. The Allies knew the Wehrmacht was crumbling from within. Bomb their roads, their railways, their fuel, and Italy would fall. But precision had rules. No freestyling, no cowboy runs. Each strike required photographic confirmation, radio uplink, and group coordination. Because one bomb dropped wrong meant 30 civilians dead, or worse, a diplomatic nightmare. Tom had memorized the protocol. He lived inside the manual. His plane, Sweet Allie, named for his little sister back in Connecticut, was loaded with 2,000-pound general-purpose bombs, enough to flatten a rail yard, but only if he got the green light. Pierce clicked his pointer. A slide changed. Grainy recon photos from 2 days ago. "This, northwest of Arezzo, is your survey target. But," he paused, "intelligence reports say the Germans pulled out." Someone snickered in the back. "So, we're bombing trees now?" A few chuckles, not from Tom. He studied the image. Grid 9C. A cluster of what looked like brush? But the shadows weren't natural, too square. Still, the CO's voice cut clean. "This is recon only. No engagement unless HQ confirms target. Understood?" "Yes, sir." They filed out. Sunlight struck like a punch. Tom blinked as his boots hit the tarmac. In the distance, his Marauder waited. Twin engines glinting, already thirsty for altitude. Germany's grip on Italy was slipping, but the Germans weren't stupid. They moved their depots under fake farms, under tree nets, under monasteries. That's what worried Tom. That night in the barracks, while others played cards, he sat with the recon photos. A red pencil in hand, circles, arrows, questions. Co-pilot Ray Douglas leaned over. "Still thinking about that ghost depot?" Tom nodded. "Trees don't grow in straight lines." Ray shrugged. "Maybe. But orders are orders." Tom didn't answer, because in the back of his head, a voice was whispering something dangerous. What if the intel's wrong? What if they missed something? The war had rules, but the enemy had none. And in 4 days, he'd be flying back over Grid 9C, with the power to follow the rules or break them. and every rule he'd ever known was about to come undone. June 22nd, 1944, 0730 hours, altitude 9,000 feet. The Marauder vibrated with steady rhythm, its engines thrumming like a distant storm. Inside the cockpit, the air stank of aluminum, sweat, and nervous breath. Approaching grid 9C in 3 minutes, came the voice of co-pilot Ray Douglas, eyes fixed on the horizon. Tom adjusted the altimeter. His fingers moved with precision, but his thoughts drifted. Below, the Tuscan hills curved like sleeping giants, olive groves, crumbling villas, vineyards, and something else. He leaned over the scope. A patch of terrain came into view, the same empty field from the briefing. But it wasn't empty. Not anymore. Smoke, faint but real, rising like a whisper through the trees. Tom blinked, adjusted the lens. Thatched roofs, no, camouflage netting. Glint of fuel drums, trucks under foliage, personnel moving in tight drills. A German supply depot, clear as day. But according to command, it didn't exist. "Ray," Tom said quietly, "you seeing this?" Ray squinted, then frowned. "That wasn't in the recon shots." "Exactly." Tom toggled the radio. "Control, this is Marauder 3 Alpha. Visual on unidentified site. Possible enemy logistics. Requesting confirmation." Static, then negative 3 Alpha. "Proceed to rally point, no strike authorized." Tom exhaled slowly. Sweat traced his temple. "That's a depot." "Could be decoys," Ray offered. "Could be civilians." Tom's scope zoomed in. A soldier in Wehrmacht gray walked between tankers, cigarette in hand. Civilians don't wear jackboots. Still, no orders, no clearance, no backup. Behind him, the bombardier, Corporal Jennings, waited with arms crossed. "Sir, payload's ready. You give the word, or you don't." Tom said nothing. His mind split. Protocol versus instinct. Court-martial versus catastrophe. One wrong drop, and he'd be labeled a rogue, a loose cannon. But if he did nothing, those trucks would roll. That fuel would move, and Allied blood would pay for his obedience. The wind howled louder against the fuselage. Then a smaller voice cut in, barely audible over the comms. "Lieutenant," it was the navigator, barely 20, scared. "That's not brush cover. Those are camo nets. Sir, that's a live target." Tom's hand hovered over the release lever. Orders said no. But the war below was real, and waiting. The depot wasn't supposed to be there, but neither was he. Tom dropped altitude, just 200 feet, a tiny dip, enough to make the turbulence snap harder against the frame. "Careful," Ray hissed. "That's not part of the flight path." "I know," Tom muttered. He wasn't diving, not yet, just verifying. Below, the depot stretched wider than he thought. Vehicles arranged like a chessboard, fuel trucks near the rear, sandbagged flak nest at the perimeter, a rail spur lined with fresh crates, munitions most likely. Everything about it screamed temporary, hidden, mobile, and vulnerable. "Jennings," Tom said, voice low. "Mark this. All of it. Grid 9C, visual confirmation of active enemy logistics." Jennings scribbled into his notebook. "Got it." The radio crackled again. HQ this time, clipped and sharp. "Marauder 3 Alpha, confirm altitude. Adjust heading. You are deviating from flight protocol." Tom replied, calm but cold. "Minor turbulence deviation. Returning to formation." Ray shot him a look. "You're threading the needle." Tom didn't answer. He was watching a German officer, black leather coat, cap in hand, pointing frantically toward the sky. "Jennings," Tom said, "ready the payload." Ray stiffened. "We're not cleared." "No, but they're not cleared to be alive either." Ray hesitated. "You sure?" Tom exhaled. Look again. Ray leaned in, following Tom's gaze. That's when he saw it. 3 more fuel trucks pulling in from the tree line. One bore the red triangle of the Panzer Division, elite armor. They're fueling up, Ray whispered, for a push. A push toward where? Florence? Anzio? Maybe straight into the Gothic line, where exhausted American infantry were already calling in short on artillery. The depot wasn't just a target. It was the hinge of the next German offensive. And they were watching it in real time. Still, the order hadn't changed. Do not engage, HQ repeated. Jennings' voice came soft. Lieutenant, if we drop without confirmation, we all burn for it. Tom stared through the scope one last time. Then something flickered, movement on the edge of the depot. A German soldier was pouring gasoline into an open-top tank while smoking. Insane. Stupid. Desperate. Tom smiled bitterly. That's our confirmation. He reached for the intercom. All crew, prepare for release run. Ray tensed. This is it? Tom's fingers closed over the switch. No more waiting, no more paperwork. Above the clouds, protocol still reigned. But here, at 9,000 feet and falling, the war was real again. One order, unsigned. One depot, unmarked. 1 second from collapse. Sweet Alley, this is 3 Alpha, commencing unsanctioned strike run on grid 9C. Tom's voice cut through the intercom like flint on steel. In the headset, silence. Then, say again, 3 Alpha. Strike not approved. Abort immediately. But Tom had already dropped 200 feet. The depot filled the scope. German troops scrambled, pointing, yelling, mounting flak guns too late. In the bomb bay, the payload clicked into sequence. Ray's voice came quiet, as if in confession. We're not going back after this. Tom didn't blink. We're not meant to. Jennings' hands moved instinctively. Arming pins pulled, release toggles flipped. Below them, fuel trucks glittered like polished bones in the sun. Through the glass, Tom watched a single white dot arc up from the depot. Flak. Too late. Bombs away. The bay yawned open. 3,000 pounds of steel and fire fell like silence before a scream. No cheering, no celebration, just the hollow slam of the bomb doors closing. Climb! Tom barked. Now! The Marauder jerked upward, engines straining as anti-air fire licked the clouds behind them. And then, impact. A dull thud through the cabin. Then another. Then everything beneath them bloomed red. A rolling chain of eruptions. Fuel tanks cooked. Ammunition trucks peeled open like metal flowers. Black smoke towered into the sky, swallowing the depot whole. Ray turned pale. Jesus! Even Jennings, stone-faced, muttered, "We actually did it!" Tom said nothing, just adjusted their heading. Because somewhere inside, something had broken. Quietly, finally. The war wasn't made of orders. It was made of decisions. And now, every Allied soldier who'd never see that fuel might live one more day because of a bomb he was never allowed to drop. Above him, silence. Below him, fire. Inside him, something he'd never be able to explain. The ground still burned as the Marauder banked west. Black plumes smeared the Tuscan sky, dense, alive, furious, like the depot itself was howling. Inside the cockpit, no one spoke. Ray stared at the altimeter, eyes wide. Jennings crossed himself. The young navigator just sat back, blinking, as if he'd forgotten what air felt like. Tom kept his hands steady on the controls, but inside, his pulse crashed like thunder. The smell of smoke, somehow, impossibly, seeped even up here. They hit something vital, not just fuel, not just trucks, the heart of a German advance. Moments later, their radio came alive again. Marauder 3 Alpha, confirm heading. You are diverting from rally path. Tom pressed the mic. Returning west, fuel nominal. Minor deviation for weather. Pause. Then, understood. Report to debrief on landing. It was calm. Too calm. They didn't know. Not yet. Tom glanced at the watch strapped over his glove. 11 seconds from bomb release to fireball. He'd remember that number for the rest of his life. From the tail gun, a voice crackled through the intercom. Sir, Germans are scattering. They're abandoning the site. I see trucks on fire. It's a slaughter down there. Tom didn't respond. He couldn't, because in his mind, he saw faces. Fuel handlers, drivers, soldiers, some barely out of school. Maybe some just like him, told to follow orders, build a depot, guard it, defend it, and now incinerated, vaporized, because he made a call, a choice. Ray spoke, almost gently. We might have just changed the front line. Tom nodded once. We didn't start the war. Another silence. Then Jennings added, but today, we sure as hell pushed it back. The clouds broke as they crossed into safer airspace. The sunlight returned. Italy sprawled beneath them, battered and beautiful. And in the quiet roar of the engines, Tom heard a question forming, not from command, not from his crew. From somewhere deeper, what kind of man disobeys to save lives? And can he live with what he just did? He didn't drop bombs. He dropped certainty. The strike footage reached Allied intelligence within 48 hours. Shot from a trailing reconnaissance Lightning, the black and white reel showed a mushrooming cloud rising above Grid 9C, followed by a slow dissolve into smoke and silence. At first, analysts thought it was a mistake. This wasn't an approved target, one colonel muttered in London. Where the hell did this footage come from? But then came the intercepts from Wehrmacht communications, barely decrypted. Depot Arezzo lost. Supply column obliterated. Fuel reserves critical. Armor halted. Request emergency reroute. Another message, more desperate. All munitions destroyed. Loss of 37 vehicles. Flak battery neutralized. Entire sector compromised. Suddenly, the unauthorized became undeniable. The strike had hit not just a depot, but the depot. The logistical hinge for a full-scale German armor thrust toward Florence. The fuel, shells, and spare parts were meant to reinforce Panzer Lehr and 26th Volksgrenadier units, preparing for a push through the Arno Valley. Without it, the offensive stalled before it began. Allied infantry, weeks from resupply, barely holding the ridgelines near Castiglione Fiorentino, reported less resistance, fewer artillery shells, and a sudden silence on the southern flank. One exhausted radio operator simply said, "They were coming," and then they weren't. Back at Foggia, word spread fast. At first in whispers, Blake dropped early. Then, in awe, Blake saw it. HQ missed it. And finally, in something else, something rare, respect. Pilots nodded in passing. Ground crews slapped the Marauder's wing with a smirk. Even Jennings, normally silent in the mess, was heard saying, "You didn't have to like it, but he saved a hell of a lot of lives." But higher up, there was silence. No reprimand, no commendation. Just a courier envelope, sealed in red, marked "Internal use only." Inside, debrief transcripts, photographs, strike analytics, and one line typed without punctuation. Results indicate successful interdiction of unregistered enemy logistics site. Subject, 2nd Lieutenant Thomas Blake. Deviation from protocol noted. Recommendation, observe further. Observe. That was the word they used when someone had done something They didn't know how to process. Not hero, not traitor. Just observe. One plane out of formation, one choice out of regulation, one strike that rewrote an entire battlefield. 3 days later, Blake sat alone outside a canvas tent on the edge of Foggia's airstrip. Boots muddy, flight jacket open, face hollow, no medal, no formal charges, just waiting. He'd reported for debrief like everyone else, filed his log, described the target, gave coordinates, waited for the hammer, either the gavel or the glory. Neither came. Instead, he was told to stand by. That was military speak for limbo. Inside the command trailer, 2 majors, one from Tactical Air Command, the other from Intelligence, argued in low tones. "You can't let this stand," said one. "He violated direct orders." He also took out 37 vehicles, a full fuel depot, and derailed a German armor push. If that's insubordination, I want 3 more just like him. Outside, Blake lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. He hadn't slept since the strike. Not really. He kept seeing the plume, how it climbed like a tower of guilt. Ray had tried to joke. Well, at least now they know who to blame when the Germans retreat. But Blake didn't laugh. Not because he regretted it, because deep down, he didn't. And that scared him. His whole life, he'd followed the book. Pre-flight, checklists, chain of command. But that day, he'd felt something clearer than the rules. And once you act on instinct, the rules don't come back the same. A jeep rumbled up. A young lieutenant stepped out. "Lieutenant Blake, command wants to see you." Inside the tent, General Robert Conlon looked up from a file. Thin, gray-haired, the kind of man who measured his words like rations. "You disobeyed standing orders." Blake nodded once. "Yes, sir. You bombed a target without authorization, initiated live ordnance release against protocol, lied about deviation on comms." "Yes, sir." Conlon closed the folder. "And you destroyed a depot our own maps didn't know existed. Saved God knows how many men. Crippled a division we'd been tracking for weeks." He leaned forward. "What I want to know, Lieutenant, is this. Did you get lucky, or did you know?" Blake's jaw clenched. "I saw the pattern, the trucks, the nets, the movement. It wasn't luck." Conlon watched him, then nodded. "No court-martial," he said flatly, "but no commendation either." Blake blinked. "We can't reward disobedience," Conlon continued, "even when it works." A pause. "You'll be transferred. New unit, new designation. Nothing goes in the record." The general stood. "One more thing," he said quietly. "If I ever have to bomb something that no one sees coming, I want you in the air." He extended his hand. Blake hesitated, then took it. He wasn't cleared. He wasn't thanked. But they didn't stop him. Weeks passed. The war pushed north. The Gothic line cracked. Florence was taken. Allied press reported strategic momentum. But deep in logistics briefings, an unmarked red X near Arezzo kept coming up. Unknown strike, depot destroyed, Axis advance halted. They never named him, never showed his photo. But the consequences rolled forward like shockwaves in silence. One day, Tom found a letter tucked into a ration box, unsigned. To whoever dropped those bombs, we were 48 hours from being overrun. The Germans didn't come. They ran out of gas. I don't know who you are, but I know this. You saved men who were already digging their own graves. A tired grunt from the 361st Infantry. Tom read it once, then again. He folded it, slowly. Slipped it behind the photo of his sister tucked in his flight jacket. He said nothing, told no one. That evening, he wandered down to the maintenance bay. There sat Sweet Allie, grease-streaked, her nose art faded but intact. He brushed his fingers along the side panel, just above where the bomb bay doors were. It was cold metal, silent, honest. Ray found him there. "They say the fuel trucks would have made it to the Arno line," Ray said. "Could have cut off 2 whole regiments." Tom didn't look up. "I know." Ray handed him something, Jennings's notebook. "Left it with the crew chief. Page 16. Tom opened it. There, scrawled in blocky ink, "Target, Arezzo. Grid 9C. Confirmed destroyed. Estimated enemy casualties. Unknown estimated Allied lives saved. Impossible to count." Tom stared at it. For once the war had answered back. Not with medals, not with promotions, but with absence. No fresh graves, no folded flags. Just boys who went home. You don't measure a bombing run in fire. You measure it in funerals that never happened. His transfer came quietly. No parade, no salute, no explanation. One morning, Tom packed his duffel, shook Jennings' hand, nodded once at Ray, and boarded a C-47 headed east. His name struck from the roster, his flight record sealed. Officially, Lieutenant Thomas Blake had fulfilled his assignment. Unofficially, he had crossed a line the Air Corps wasn't ready to draw. His new unit stationed him in Corsica, coastal runs, low risk. They gave him a new call sign, new crew. No one asked about Arezzo. No one knew. But whispers traveled. In Naples, a mechanic once paused, stared at his jacket and asked, "You the guy from Grid 9? Tom didn't answer. He didn't need to, because even in silence, stories survive. One day, during a rare shore pass in Rome, Tom sat at a cafe just off Via del Corso. The city hummed with its usual chaos. Mopeds, bells, dust rising like smoke in the afternoon light. At the next table, 2 British officers were discussing enemy supply lines. "Fascinating, really," one said, sipping his espresso. "The Krauts had a whole depot near Arezzo, hidden, completely off the books." The other leaned in. "Heard it got flattened. No one knows by who." "Intel missed it. Probably just luck," the first muttered. "Or some poor bastard didn't get the memo." Tom stirred his coffee. Didn't speak. Didn't smile. He just watched the sun tilt west, warm, unknowing, across the rooftops. And in the distance, trucks rolled by, engines roaring with life they might not have had. The war moved on, without thanks, without memory. And yet, 1,000 rifles didn't fire because of him. 100 medics didn't bleed in the dirt. 1 depot didn't deliver death. All because a pilot saw something and didn't wait to be told it was real. He wasn't in the history books. But if you trace every supply line that never made it, you'll find his shadow. Years later, a war museum in Kansas displayed a rusted fuel drum, recovered from the Arezzo Valley, burnt, twisted, partially fused with the skeletal remains of a truck chassis. The placard read, "Unmarked German Fuel Depot, destroyed. June 22, 1944. Strike origin unknown." Every few months, veterans would stop to stare at it. Some would frown. Some would nod. A few would whisper a name not printed anywhere. And then they'd move on. One of them, a former infantryman who'd fought outside Florence, told his grandson, "We were trapped. No shells, no fuel. We braced for a German offensive, and it never came." When asked why, he just said, "Someone up there disobeyed at the right time." In a worn leather trunk kept in the attic of a farmhouse near Hartford, Connecticut, there's a faded spiral notebook. Inside, a single page. Grid 9C, unauthorized strike. Smoke column visible from 9,000 feet. Return path stable. Still no regret. And next to it, folded and brittle, a letter. You saved men who were already digging their own graves. You don't know me, but I owe you Christmas. I owe you my son. Thank you. 361st Infantry. No medals ever arrived. No promotions came. But that notebook, that letter, held more weight than any citation ever could. Because it proved something history often forgets. Sometimes, the man who breaks the rules is the only one who truly understood the war. And so we ask, what would you have done if you were him? If you saw the smoke, the trucks, the depot they said wasn't there, and had 10 seconds to choose between obedience and saving men who'd never even know your name, would you wait, or would you pull the trigger?